Well, that was Van Morrison. Awesome song. I never heard it before. Discovered it last night. Really good. Carolyn came over and said, "Who's that?" I said, "Van Morrison." She said, "I thought that was him, but I've never heard him be so good." Yep, the new song. New discovery. I don't know what album it is. Maybe it's known. Maybe it's popular. But what a marvelous set we just heard. We heard revised music for guitar and low-budget orchestra, then Transylvania Boogie, then Yo Mama, then Stuff Up the Cracks, and then Sleep Dirt. Awesome stuff. Now, James Poosty was making some interesting comments on the way through. He was saying, as Turkey Palat, I suppose, Bert and Roxy, you weren't looking at the commentary, right?
No.
You weren't looking at the chat line. So what he says, and Kyle was saying stuff, this is a good statement by James. Bob may not know music, but he knows textures. That's very accurate. In 1969, early 1970, I asked Cosmic Awareness to talk about Zappa's music, and they said that he combined collage textures, which is kind of tactile. That gave me this clue that Frank was not just doing ear stuff. So, James, I've always regarded him as collaging textures, so I do know. So I learned from Frank how to judge textures, which would be harmonic climates, I guess. And then James, whatever he was listening to, maybe revised music or the second one, Transylvania Boogie, but probably revised music. He goes, "Inspired choice, Bob." And Sky Goddess Sue says, "Good night." James says, "Good night to Sue." I say, "Good night, Rumpy." Rumpy. I'm calling her Rumpelstiltskin. And then James says, "Indeed." Listen to this. He says, "Indeed, you seem to have a new vista of clarity tonight, Bob." Of course, as Ian said, I played it earlier today. People were saying, Ian's a lot forthcoming or something. He's great. He's been really good the last few weeks. And I asked Ian about that. He says, no, we haven't changed. The people have changed. They have learned. They are learning now, Bob. They're paying attention, taking it seriously. So I will claim, James, that I have no new vista of clarity tonight other than what I did say to James, which was, yes, James, I agree. I have new clarity. When you hear my private session later tonight, the one I did yesterday, I think it was, with Ian, you'll see why, James. Then James says, "It's simplex in nature, but I can spot it." I don't know if he's talking about Zappa music or what I'm saying. It's simplex in nature, but I can spot it. Then Kyle, but he calls himself Kyke, K-Y-K-E. I think it's Kyle, but I'm not sure. "Bob, see Zappa's finger speed when he improvises. It's like the speed of the riffs is what leads from one riff to another. He allows his fingers freedom from the brain. It's like heavy jazz." I don't know if that's Kyle or someone else. Then James says, "Bob can wrangle that smoke monster." And I respond to Kyke, but I think he's Kyle, so I call him Kyle. I said, I hear/see it, what you're saying, Kyke. And then James says, "Excellente," referring to whatever the next song was, probably Transylvania Boogie. Then I get all excited, and I go, "What a tremendous, majestic performance." And I may have been talking about Yo Mama. Right, Yo Mama's when I said that. Then James said, "Oh my, one of my favorite Zappa compositions." And that might have been Yo Mama. Or Stuff Up the Cracks. I don't know which one he meant. Then he says, "No, this must be," I'm not sure. He says, "It took probably 1,000 listens before I could fully love it." So which one is that, James? Is that Yo Mama or Stuff Up the Cracks? And then I said, yes, I just sort of threw it out to everybody, are you digging it, HCE? And I meant Yo Mama, which is about 12 minutes long. And then James says, HCE, where is the Zappa connection? And then he says, or HCE in general? And I said, yes, I meant it in general. Then Kike says, he also seems to avoid patterns and repeat dash ions. I don't think that's something that Kyle would say. And repeat dash ions. He also seems to avoid patterns and repeat ions, or repeat repetitions, or repeat ions. Then James says, everybody is coming, I guess at the ending of Yo Mama. Then James says, he uses the tonal mode of... Right. He uses the tonal mode of patterns and note clusters. Now, Roxy, is that a technical phrase? Tonal mode of patterns. What's the tonal mode? Such a term in music?
Yes. There are modes and tonalities, and they refer to, like the Greeks have a system of different types of scales, and each scale, a little like the Indians, they thought each scale had like a mood or a function for like ritual or dancing or this and that, and each had a name like Dorico, Jonico, Misophrenius, all these, and it was according to the note with which the scale started, like C, R, E.
Right.
The scale changes, and the mood of the tone changes.
And that's what.
But I didn't heard the phrase.
You haven't heard tonal mode of patterns before.
There is a lot of people that have studied that, and there is a person who did a lot of study of Frank, and he says he prefers the Lydian.
Yes.
Mode.
The Lydian, Lydin, Lydian mode. Yeah, Lydin.
Maybe we could do something and explain a little that, but I don't know exactly to which of the songs he's referring, or I didn't hear the phrase with.
No clusters. I think sure it would be. It seems to be Transylvania Boogie at least, and maybe Yo Mama. So then.
But in your Mama, it's amazing, this contrast of maybe you should go with your mom, and then the amazing solo. It's like, is this the same band?
It goes majestic. Yeah, it goes transcendent.
Yes, it's like he's talking about Bob, never said stuff about Bob. Like you said things about Zappa. Like this has never been said about Zappa. It's like he's commenting
talking
on
about me. Yo Mama is about me. Yeah, I should go back to Managua. It's like an ion environment. It's like Corbin coming in, and he says his stupid stuff, very low guttural stuff, and then if he sticks with it, he gets uplifted by ion. All of a sudden, he's sailing the highest levels of Matterhorn or Mount Everest, and this majestic level suddenly lifts Corbin out of the mud, or anybody out of the muck, out of simple motion into force field playing. So then, I don't know which song this was. Might have been Yo Mama. James says, "Oh my, this song is epic." Then Kike says, "Now doo-wop to the blues in one song." So I guess it went from doo-wop to the blues in Stuff Up the Cracks in one song. That's pretty good. And then Robert says, "Is that Spanish Fly? I love like paella." So again, we don't understand Robert that well. Then James says, sprechstimme. It is a conversation. Madeline says, well, this is nice, but I think she's referring to wavelength. I'm not sure. Then Madeline says, laughing aloud, my fingers get stuck. Did you guys hear the beep? Someone, either Roxy or Bert, blicked the phone, right? Beep. Happened a couple times where you're accidentally hitting the phone. Anyways, it came. I thought it was her, but right. So I don't know what Madeline means. No. And Madeline her phone is not audible, I don't think. Then James says mad and lean. I'm not sure if that refers to sleep dirt. Maybe he's going to tell me as I move along here. Robert says Morrison spicy wedges and ribs, 2 pounds. Denise smiles. Now Denise is in Australia, and I told her the number. I wonder if she's called in. And then yes, James is saying yo mama is when he was talking about the epic. This is epic. Took him a dozen times, 1,000 times before he got it, before he could appreciate it. I guess that's all yo mama. Now I can't see how anybody could not get it, but I've listened to it every now and then, and it gets better and better. And then Kike says Kike is Kyle, so he is Kyle. Then Robert says skull and ankle clusters. Just ignore the pain. And that's the last message. So let's go over and see if anybody's phoned in. Sean, or just Sean. So I have some articles here, but do you have some things you guys want to continue on about Zappa? Got things to say?
I think that's enough.
Okay, for our high
I find it interesting that most people, when they take drugs, say they're experimenting. So it's like
you don't believe
they're trying to create a parallel lab.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, good point. Yeah, Carolyn used to say back in the 80s, we are the experiment. We are the experiment. The world is a lab for big pharma. She used to say that part. So let me read you a couple of Zappa articles, because these are articles coming out after Zappa's broken up the Mothers, so it's sort of interesting how they evaluate the 5 years of Mother's invention and what they think's happening. So this guy, Jonathan Green, Zappa said, he has a quote from Zappa: surrounded by the business, eating through all the courses of a luncheon, gradually accumulating more and more different varieties of food and drink inside, it's hardly the ideal place for an interview, especially if the interview is with iconoclast supreme Frank Zappa. Okay, so I thought the dash Frank Zappa was quote. So this is Jonathan Green talking about having dinner with Frank and interviewing him. Surrounded by the business in the restaurant, business executives, eating through all the courses of a luncheon, gradually accumulating more and more different varieties of food and drink inside, it's hardly the ideal place for an interview, especially if the interview is with iconoclast supreme Frank Zappa. So then he starts the article. Zappa has earned, or perhaps had foisted on him, the reputation as the king of freaks. Yet his conversation, in marked contrast to his friend Captain Beefheart, is remarkably earthbound for one who the captain has described as a Martian. For a start, Zappa is an amazing businessman. He doesn't disdain the non-musical side of pop, in the way that many rock artists do. His current visit with Beefheart to England, that would be in 1969, fall of 69, was for the sole purpose of concluding a deal between CBS and his label Straight. So, like an artist and / scientist, he has a practical skill. He can do business. It's not a problem for him because that's part of the programming. Then it says, unfortunately for our conversation, Zappa was beset by the hordes. In what was, now look at this, in what was laughingly called the clinic, it's like the lab, the clinic, he and the captain were supposed to entertain the ranks of press, business, and so on, who poured, apparently, without a break, into the interview area. We talked roughly from the steak to the brandy, and then it was too late to continue. Urgent hands and voices grabbed at the stars in quotes, and the show went on. What comes below is the Rolling Stone portion of the clinic. Dr. Z prescribes a mean script. ... So then he says, never read this article before, I don't think. There were this group of people from Paris who put the shit on this festival mainly because they were scared to death of having large numbers in that city. So I guess they stopped the festival. So these guys who wanted to put the festival on just refused to quit, and they finally wound up choosing a cow pasture about 2 hours out of Brussels. Oh yeah, now I saw the video of this in late 69 or early 70s. Somebody called me up and said, hey, Zappa's on TV. And they actually showed footage of this concert. I think Giorgio Gomelski had something to do with this. So yeah, they couldn't do it in the city, so they ended up doing it out in the agricultural pastures of Brussels. A lot of fog, and I guess it must have been 20 or 30 degrees out there. It was really miserable. A few tents, and the people began to turn up from nowhere, and they turned on the PA, and that worked. And they turned on the lights, and they worked, and the groups actually began to play. And by God, they had a pop festival. Now, this is where Zappa is the manager for Beefheart. Beefheart's being featured at the festival, but Zappa ends up being in the festival, jamming with Archie Shepp and Roland Kirk and interesting other kinds of musicians, and probably even playing with Beefheart. But there's probably better descriptions of the details. So he says, and by God, they had a pop festival. And then they looked at it and realized that they had to keep on for 5 days. I was asked to join the festival. They first of all asked for the mothers to play, but there weren't any mothers at the time. So Pierre Lotez, who I had known for some time, asked me to co-host the festival. But when I arrived there, I found that most of the people spoke French, and they wouldn't know what the fuck I was talking about, so it was useless for me to introduce the groups. So Pierre suggested that I might play with some of the groups. And this is a guy called Jonathan Green. I don't know who he is. So Pierre suggested that I might play with some of the groups, but I was at a great disadvantage because I didn't have my own guitar, and I had to use other people's guitars and the amps that were around for everyone at the festival to use, and they kept blowing up and fucking up, and on top of that, some of the groups found it a little difficult to relate to what I was playing. Because if you have a group that has certain arrangements and sets that they play every night, it's difficult to stick in an alien element that isn't part of the setup. The audience and the reviewer forget about those variables, perhaps seeming a little anxious to prove that I was a crappy guitar player. First of all, there's a wider and larger void is exactly the word, between what I play on the guitar and what I write on paper. The intent is basically different. When I get a guitar in my hands, what I want to express is what I'm thinking right at that moment, the chord progression that happens to be going by. And 80% of the time, I can manage to project what is happening. I'm a composer who plays the guitar, not a guitar player who is out there. I think he's quoting Zappa. Shit, that was all Zappa talking. Yes, okay. So let's just. Wow. So there were a group of people from Paris, he says, who put the shit on this festival and stopped it. So these guys end up going out in the country. So and they turned on the lights, and by God, we had a festival. So they're asking Zappa to host it, but he speaks English. Everybody's French, so fuck that. So then they want him to play, but he doesn't have his equipment, and everything's fucking up. So then he's saying, because if you have it now, remember Zappa says he can't play jazz. Because if you have a group that has certain arrangements and sets that they play every night, it's difficult to stick in an alien element, which is him, that isn't part of the setup. The audience and the reviewer forget about those variables, perhaps seeming a little anxious to prove that I was a crappy guitar player. Anxious to prove that. First of all, there's a wider and larger void. Void is exactly the word between what I play on the guitar and what I write on paper. The intent is basically different. When I was reading this and I'm saying, oh, this Jonathan Green does the same thing as Zappa. But it's the way he leads into it. You don't know it's Zappa. He says, Dr. Z prescribes a mean script. and it's a blurry Xerox, so maybe there's quotation marks, but I don't see it. The intent is basically different. When I get a guitar in my hands, what I want to express is what I'm thinking right at the moment. We've heard him talk about that. Right at that moment, the chord progression that happens to be going by. And 80% of the time, I can manage to project what is happening. I'm a composer who plays a guitar, not a guitar player who is out there doing his reputation on the thing. And my intent to what I'm trying to do on the instrument involve not just the individual notes, but the overall sound. Because that would be the harmonic climate. The overall sound of what I'm doing. So wide with so much inside and narrowing down so wide with so much inside and narrowing down and it's like drawing pictures with it. I try to keep it as spontaneous as possible. I'm really limited when I'm handed a guitar with strings an inch off the fingerboard. So he's limited when the guitar has strings an inch off the fingerboard, designed that way to suit another guitar player's hands. And being plugged into an amplifier that decided not to work the minute you turn your switch on, that gives you a bit of a problem. The rest of the music, the written stuff, romantic, rhythmic, exploring, not just weird time signatures, but polyrhythmic combinations where you can take a bar of 3/4, and ordinarily in that bar of 3/4 you have 6/8 notes, and I jam things like 5/8 notes in the space of 4 and 5/16 notes in the remaining part of the bar. I think he just fucking doesn't know what he's doing. And he's claiming he's doing all these 3, 4, 5, 6. He's just fucking wrangling. But he's probably, I just don't know. And then he goes, that's for one instrument. For another instrument, you have 5/8 notes in the space of 6/8 notes overlapping the whole thing. This causes some problems, sometimes because a lot of musicians don't play those fives convincingly. I found that even among some of the best studio players in L.A., they see a group of notes with a 5 over the top and they freak off. And they guess at where they fall and don't really count it out. Here's Frank saying they're not. They say Frank's no good. He's saying they're not any good. Then there's this phrase, the classical heads concert. I don't know if he's saying that. Maybe, okay, so this is Frank, I assume. How cute. The pop classical gap should definitely be bridged, but it should be done honestly. So that's what he does, the pop classical bridge. Not like slapping a few stringed instruments behind an electric band and having them play a few unison riffs together and following that by some low-grade rock and roll, bouncing the two back and forth and call it bridging the gap. Well, this is interesting, him describing what he's doing. He should be paying more attention to the works of the modern composers. I see my music as moving towards modern serious music. There were some things on the Freakout album, primitive as that was, that were quite contemporary, could stand on their own, packaged in a way that would reach a young audience. The most important part of the progression of the Mothers of Invention was the development of the technical skills of the members. The things we perform among even on our most recent albums were written years ago. And the only reason they weren't performed before is they had to wait till the musicians could actually perform them. The big trend, turning the page, the big trend today is toward instrumental music. Finding out all the players that all they were strumming out backing for vocalists can actually, okay, so finding out that all the players that were just strumming backing for vocalists, finding out they can actually play something worthwhile on their instruments. That's what people are finding out. Most of the new orchestra scores are written in pencil in planes. I guess he's talking about his own stuff. Most of his orchestra scores are written in pencil in airplanes, airports, and holiday inns. I carry in my briefcase all the things I need to write. I haven't heard most of the music, and I really would like to hear what it sounds like and get on and write some more. Right now, we are in the process of trying to figure out who will perform it. If it goes well, our little plan would be to get an existing London orchestra to play it. If that doesn't work, then I have to put together an orchestra of studio players, which might not be as tight as an existing orchestra. My business interests are self-defense. Nothing reprehensible about being paid for doing something you like. I don't like the idea of being a musician because you love music. Okay, he says, I don't like the idea of being a musician because you love music and then having to support yourself by working on a gas station in the daytime. I would as soon be paid for the work I like to do. If I'm conscientious enough about the work I like to do, I hope I don't have to go out and get a job. Refusal to deal with business. Can you imagine if Zappa became a gas station attendant? Can't imagine it. Like he was going to make it. He's too important not to fucking do it. I mean, be successful. I hope I don't have to go out and get a job. Refusal to deal with business is taking it awfully seriously. So if you refuse to deal with business, that means you are taking it too seriously. To say that I'm such an artist is stupid. The thing that pisses me off most about the public reception of the mother's invention was the complete stupidity with which they viewed things that I thought were most obvious. That's like what I had to put up, what McLuhan put up with. We all, us great artists had to put up with what we thought was obvious is viewed as stupid. Like this Ion thing. There should be millions of people wanting to hear Ion, but the majority of the 35 people who heard him think he's stupid. All right. So, not anymore, though. That's the way it was. Not anymore. Let's see. The thing that pisses me off most about the public reception of the mother's invention was the complete stupidity with which they viewed things that I thought were most obvious. The gags that we put on for the groups. People actually thought we were, quote, only in it for the money, unquote. He says, you see these guys on the cover of that album looking like a bunch of ragamuffins, and the mere thought of that could possibly be trying to earn a living was an absurd joke. So nobody interpreted the cover properly. They're wearing these silly women's dresses, looking ridiculous, and they're only in it for the money, as if they're packaging themselves properly. But everyone started to think, these guys are not artistic. They're only in it for the money. He says, I went, what? Or what Roxy would say, why? Why? I went, why? When I saw the reaction. In other words, he was amazed that nobody got the joke. I had a conversation on the phone with Paul McCartney about the time of that album. And, you know, it's a satire on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I had a conversation on the phone with Paul McCartney about the time of that album and asked to do a parody of that cover. He was shocked and appalled that I would even talk business with him on the phone. I've actually heard him talk about this, but I didn't see it written out like this. And so then he quotes Paul McCartney, we have these managers. You mean you talk business? Unquote. And Zappa says the final outcome to the conversation was, quote, I can't say I'll ask the other members of the group. Or I can't say, wait till I ask the other members of the group, and blah, blah, blah. And after about 6 months holding it up, it was finally settled with lawyers. Their attorney eventually called MGM and said it. So the way Frank talks about it, he says, he got talking to Paul McCartney, and he wanted to talk to Paul McCartney about, hey, let us do this satire. And Paul said, well, that's up to the manager. And Frank says, he said to Paul, well, why should I talk to the manager? He works for you. You tell me what you want. And McCartney wouldn't do it. So that's what he's saying here, that McCartney was shocked that Frank wanted to talk business. That's for the managers and the lawyers, says Paul. So then Frank says, I watched the politics in the States go by. I watch the politics in the United States go by and gag over it once in a while. I get involved in it as much as I am an artist, and I say what I like about the environment in which I produce my work. So he says he comments about the environment. That's like McLuhan would say, commenting on the environment in which I'm a teacher. So Frank says, to get out in the street and wave a flag is a waste of time, definitely a non-functional gesture. We've heard him say that before. It doesn't alter any condition, and if you want to be a hippie on the weekends and you want to be involved and don't have anything much to do, go to a demonstration. A lot of people misconstrued the early albums because they didn't see that I was criticizing both sides of the fence. Tetra manager, criticizing both sides. On one hand, I have Bow Tie Daddy talking about this dude who drinks and goes home in his Lincoln. And then the discussion about the flower punks. And all that album did was alienate the flower punks. I haven't dropped the social stuff. Only the blatant stuff is gone. political, social stuff can exist on a non-vocal level. In a more subtle way, I don't want to carry on doing the same thing forever. So that was a pretty good article. Anybody have anything to say about it?
The flower punks are these hippies with the flowers, or what he's calling the flower?
Yes.
Flower punks.
The hippies never call themselves punks, so it's flower hippies, but Frank is calling them flower punks, which was, I guess, kind of a put-down of the hippies who didn't think themselves as punks. So the flower punks, it's like an insult. These hippies were flower guys, but they were punks. And he thought what they did was stupid. Anything else you want to say? Here's what he says in the Rolling Stone, which is always sort of sniping at Frank. They go, the Thank You Award. It goes to Frank Zappa on folding his mother's invention. Then they have a quote from Frank. I got tired of playing for people who clap for all the wrong reasons. I thought it was time to give the people a chance to figure out what we've done already before we do any more. Okay. I guess he wanted for them to figure out how he had programmed them. And they didn't know that they'd been programmed by Frank. So here's a review. Now, at the time of this concert in Belgium, Zappa released Hot Rats, which was a surprising album. People were shocked because it's the beginning of fusion jazz rock. It's an awesome album. It stood out above everything else. It's amazing. And you get to hear Frank being more of an instrumentalist. And not many people knew Captain Beefheart, and he was singing on it. There's a lot of people who don't know much about Frank or don't explore his music, but they all have heard Hot Rats, and they're all saying, that's my favorite album. What an amazing album. So here's a review of it. It says, they're talking about Jefferson Airplane or the Youngbloods and that part of pop culture, like maybe the Laurel Canyon and San Francisco scene. So they go, another side of the revolution is to be found in the pure Laurel Canyon music of Frank Zappa. His new album, his second album under his own name, the first one was Lumpy Gravy, is the very life beat. This new album is the very life beat of Hollywood music. Every pore of Hot Rats echoes with the vibrations of those few freaky square miles. An album of his own music, an album where Frank reveals all the goodies he has been saving up since Lumpy Gravy, carefully mixed and back together to sound just as Frank wanted them to. So that's right. The album surprises people. Like, he just pulls out a level of his talent that no one had noticed. He says, they're saying it's the environment of Laurel Canyon. It is the sound of the hot L.A. summer when Frank would get up around 3 in the afternoon and sit by the pool for a while with Moon Unit Zappa, his daughter. Then around about 8 or 9 in the evening, he would get into the Buick, and Gail would drive him down the canyon to the studios on McFadden Avenue or Street. Kansas, that would be the roadie, Kansas would have already left with the panel truck containing the equipment. So he'd go into TT&G Studios. TT&G is the home of some beautiful 16-track equipment, and as Frank inched his way along the 2-inch tape, using only a few minutes at a time, then returning to the top and filling in the information sheets to each tape box piled up like the manuscript for a novel. So Frank inched his way along the 2-foot tape or 2-inch tape or something. No, it can't be 2-inch. 2-something tape, using only a few minutes at a time, then returning to the top and filling in as the information sheets to each tape box piled up like the manuscript for a novel. The studio musicians were conducted by Johnny Otis of the Johnny Otis Show. He was a famous black musician. Resplendent in black silk socks, snakeskin shoes. Johnny Otis. Resplendent in black silk socks, snakeskin shoes, and Esquire jacket. Elegantly casual, finger-popping, and getting in real close on the drummer, hoping to get that little bit more energy into the sound by frenzied clapping. hoping to get that little bit more energy into the sound by frenzied clapping. I guess he was clapping. At the end of the session, Johnny still had every hair carefully in place. It didn't move an inch. So I guess they're describing the recording of Hot Rats. Frank would stomp his feet and nod his head in the control booth through each number. Then, as the red lights went off, announce, "Not bad." In his head, he could hear the perfect version, telling Ian Underwood, quote, "Play facing the wall, and we'll mic the sound as it bounces back over your shoulder." That's how they got that really greasy sound back in the 50s. And then again, Frank interrupting Ian in the middle of a tenor solo with a revision of several lines of notes. Frank wouldn't bother to write them down, just to say them out of his head. And Ian remembers perfectly. Beefheart stalking the studio waiting to sing Willie the Pimp, declaring Frank a genius and everyone else motherfuckers. Now, when I was with Don Van Vliet, Captain Beefheart, in the summer of '71, he was very mad at Frank. Now, this is the period where the great album Trout Mask Replica, Beefheart's classic, is coming out. So he seems to like Frank at that point. But he's really pissed off 2 years later at Frank. He says, "I don't want to be lumped in with all those other weirdos like Alice Cooper and Wildman Fisher." But here, he's declaring Frank a genius and everyone else is a motherfucker. Late in the night, but that could be a compliment, motherfucker. Late in the night, Gail would arrive with the Buick after Frank had made some trial mixes to listen to later that night. By 8 or 9 a.m. in the morning, Frank would at last go to bed. The house air conditioning would be barely coping with the 90-degree sunshine outside of L.A., August and September 1969. And it's right when Karen and I are heading out to Seattle to live with Dave Worster. Now it's ready for you. I guess the album is ready for you. A summer condensed into the limited space of one album called Hot Rats, and on reprise, number RS6356. Watch for Frank's amazing rock-out guitar solos, and also Jean-Luc Ponty's violin on, quote, "It Must Be a Camel," and also the gumbo variation. Beefheart sings Willie the Pimp in his usual inimitable style. Miss Christine of the GTOs peers at you outrageously from the sleeve. You can't miss her. So she's a GTO that makes the cover of Hot Rats and is dead a few years later. Jean-Luc Ponty has gone on to record a whole album of Frank Zappa compositions for World Pacific. That's a really good album. I don't think it's digitized, or I don't have the digital version. There'd be stuff to play there. Frank arranged the numbers for him, and when I saw him in L.A. in November, he was cutting the master tape to ribbons and trying out new endings and insertions. The results were amazing. The furthest out violin playing I've ever heard, that's Jean-Luc Ponty, and of course with that characteristic Zappa sound coming from the key changes and multi-time signatures. Frank has also completed the editing and assembling of the Mother's last album, Bert and Weenie Sandwich, which will be a collection of... He released several albums, Bert and Weenie Sandwich, Weasel Ripped My Flesh, and Chunga's Revenge throughout 1970. Stuff that the Mothers did in 68, 69. So Bert and Weenie Sandwich, which has some of their very best work on it, including some chrome-plated rockouts, which will make you think twice before calling Led Zeppelin heavy. In other words, Frank is better than Led Zeppelin. As Frank never goes out, sometimes for months on end, he never goes out for months on end, unless on tour or going to recording studios, you can be sure that at this moment, more music is being written or mixed in his basement studio high in the Santa Monica Hills, insulated from all outside influences and interruptions by his court and his machines. This total dedication to his work shows in the quality of it. It's always of the very highest and best. So here's Frank actually getting a big reputation, really getting complimented, because everybody could focus on him. He provided music for people to focus on, so they started to appreciate him after he broke up the Mother's invention. So Rolling Stone has a review of Hot Rats That was an article. Now, this is a guy named Dick Lawson. I don't know him. Here's what he says about Hot Rats. Hot Meat. Looking back to the Mother's last and most recent album, Uncle Meat, the seeds of discontent are apparent. The group worries about bread and gigs, the bubblegum parodies that seem mere sugar on the pill in that context. They really meant something in terms of Freak Out or Ruben and the Jets. Okay, so these bubblegum parodies meant something on Freak Out and the album Ruben and the Jets. The contemporary music neatly parceled under King Kong. There's sections of King Kong on that fourth side of Uncle Meat. The contemporary music neatly parceled under King Kong on side 4. Yes, looking back on that great record, it was too long and too irrelevant. Moreover, it was recorded over 2 years ago, and in the ever-changing world of modern music, that's a long time. Nothing more recent or new had been heard from Zappa. Their last Albert Hall gig was pretty close to Uncle Meat. So Zappa was always given a bum deal in Rolling Stone. Now, I'm not saying this review will be a bum deal, but they make these snarky remarks, saying that the album was too long and too irrelevant. Bullshit. We wanted even more discs. So now he says, Hot Rats. Currently, he's rehearsing a new band for the Albert Hall and other places next April. Zappa is only faintly predictable. He'll either provide a further out electronic evening, so they're trying to predict what Zappa's going to do next. He'll either provide a further out electronic evening. Look at this. Although the failure of previous attempts led to the breakup of the Mothers. Don't think that's very accurate. So it'll either provide a further out electronic evening or a tight rock and roll band. He's capable of either in his head, on stage, and on record. Hot Rat sees it on record. It's like elastic rock. He stretched out the structures of rock, all its basic riffs, and pulled them in every direction to make it a three-dimensional music that really only has its base in rock. And he says, it's a showcase for Zappa's guitar and Ian Underwood's keyboards and sax. Then in brackets, now listen to the King Kong variations and compare them to side 2, King Kong variations on Uncle Meat, and compare them to side 2 of Hot Rats, and see what 2 years of playing with Zappa has done to Ian Underwood. The strangest news is that he's working full-time with Beefheart as a guitarist. I guess Underwood is somehow. I don't know what. Working with Beefheart is Zappa. I don't know what that means. The strangest news is that he's working full-time with Beefheart as a guitarist. That's the end of the bracketed part. The compositions are all by the lovable Frank and all instrumental except Willie the Pimp. And he quotes the lyrics of Willie the Pimp, and he says, the Mother's Festival Hall concert many months ago never really got across to the majority of the audience, which was a shame because Zappa spent a lot of time and bread on the orchestra and playlet. But one thing that did register was the moment when he picked up his guitar, savaged the wah-wah pedal into action, and moved off in an incredible solo, right out of nowhere. The song Son of Green Jeans on Hot Rats has the same feel as that solo. Zappa's not just a brilliant technician and studio worker. His guitar playing can be emotional, too. At times, he's as good as Larry Coryell, or is it vice versa? Larry Coryell was a hot jazz guitarist at that point. Jean-Luc Ponty, the French violinist, helps out with a number of others, but side 2 belongs mainly to Ian Underwood. He's lost some of his jazz cliches, and his best work on this has comparison to... So Ian Underwood has lost some of his jazz cliches, and his best work in this has comparison to little else. So his best work is incomparable. But try as he does, he can't top Zappa's performance. Zappa has said so much recently. What is this? Zappa has said so much recently and been quoted and interviewed so often in relation to non-musical topics that there he is as the environmental programmer talking on non-musical topics, that it's reassuring to discover after all that his real concern is his own particular musical integrity. That's what counts for him and should do for us. Suffice it so, they don't want to deal with the environmental programmer. They want to pretend he's just a musician in the end. Suffice it to say that Hot Rats is the most honest and musical album that he has ever been associated with, and deserves to put him in the higher echelons of modern composers and guitarists. Hot meat. So, this is not a bad review. So, maybe the last bad review. Let's see. Any comments, people?
Did you say that Rolling Stone always gave Frank a hard time?
Yes. Yeah, and he always made fun of them. Something they did some things I don't remember that he didn't like. He didn't trust them or something. What'd you say, Roxy?
Well, I think he could see through, just like he would criticize the flower punks, the hippies.
Right.
He was also very critical of the journalists, because most of the interviews were very superficial. They were not really into the music, but most into the business of music.
Right.
And these magazines like the Rolling Stones are actually there to promote the companies, not the musicians. And he could see how all this worked, and I suppose that was the reason.
Right.
He could see it's not about the music. It's just business.
Right. Okay, in this magazine, a British magazine, there's a review of the GTOs and their album Permanent Damage, put on Zappa's album called Straight. So, somebody named, this is Miles, the guy who's actually the Zappa journalist, is writing about Permanent Damage. So, he's a fan of Zappa, so this might be a bit biased. He says, it's not too difficult to reject the spectacle of Hollywood, to drop out, find yourself, reevaluate your ideas. That's all not too difficult, unless you live in Hollywood. So it's not too difficult to reject the spectacle of Hollywood, out there in middle America, to drop out, find yourself, reevaluate your ideas, unless you live in Hollywood. What if Hollywood is all you know? If the city of plastic dreams and paper mache reality is your environment. So I guess he's saying the GTOs grew up in L.A. So what if Hollywood is all you know? If the city of plastic dreams and paper mache reality is your environment. Described by Raymond Chandler as, quote, the city with the personality of a paper cup. Los Angeles houses over 8 million people, and some of them are the GTOs. Another is Frank Zappa. The only What? You said something?
No, I just laughed.
Oh, okay.
Because in a way, what he's talking about is what McClone is saying about Siddhartha, that at the time there were a lot of people dropping out, trying to find themselves. And they start this war on their own senses, on their thoughts, on their perception. Right. Trying to find themselves. They felt alienated from themselves.
Yes.
No identity,
because they were in the new software communism of the global theater, which the individualist American would be find hard to take, and would be find hard to retrieve the old American image or to forge a new one. But they are forced to forge a new one or retrieve an old one. So he says 8 million people, and some of them are the GTOs. Another person is Frank Zappa, the only sociologist cataloging the condition of American society. Now, that's what people thought McLuhan was, the sociologist cataloging the condition of American society. So Zappa gets the same category. So Zappa is the only sociologist cataloging the condition of American society, the phenomena of the breakup of today's American youth, Zappa, who uses the medium of youth, records, and the form rock and roll, and who is deeply involved enough with his subjects to recognize them all as fellow humans. Yet his phenomenal skill at editing enables him to isolate the most telling and naked statements of the precise condition, First came a chillingly accurate and unsentimental account of the pressures and the environment which drove Wildman Fisher, account of the pressures and the environment which drove Wildman Fisher, and I guess environment of the cruelty of his contemporaries towards him now. The hippies on the strip, I guess, made fun of Wildman Fisher. Fisher's album is followed by the GTOs singing and talking about their experiences and themselves. And then it lists the experiences: the soft cars, Moki monsters, cones, the high school. These are topics in the song lyrics. And the high school gym, and most important, socializing with pop stars. They talk to the plaster casters of Chicago on the telephone. I guess that's part of the album. You were looking into plaster casters, Roxy. They talk to the plaster casters of Chicago on the... What? What's funny?
No, I find it very interesting. Yes, that you say Rocky, whatever.
Oh, yes.
But, I think that the really interesting of Frank Zappa producing the GTOs was to document that phenomenon. He saw they were not really musicians or artists, but he was documenting these people looking for an identity and a role, and the confusion of dropping out of the mainstream and looking for new ways of being and expressing themselves, and that was the value of doing the GTOs.
Yeah, he was documenting people responding to the new arts. The new arts were the global theater media environments. And the little chemical body is struggling to figure out a way to respond. And one angle is to make an album. But he's documenting the effects of the new environment, not so much the effects of records. Even though that has fads, there's... no one had ever experienced the globe as it was happening in the 60s, so it's different. He's not trying to make artists. Like, they can be unaccomplished, unskilled, but they represent so many people trying to find their identity and looking at the old role of artist and seeing if that would work. And, of course, you can't do that unless you have some amazing talent that some advertising agency can use or something. So they talk. So the GTOs talk to the plaster casters of Chicago on the telephone, and the men who pick them up hitchhiking across Los Angeles, I'm not sure. And he cites the album Permanent Damage. The album refers to the girls themselves, trying to make sense of the plastic electronic city with its permanent summer, its unnaturally large flowers blooming throughout the year, its palm trees and its major industry, the creation and marketing of dreams and fantasies of love and fulfillment as made by the record and movie industries. L.A. as a city buys more records than the whole of Britain. Continuous pop radio, TV, and billboards provide the scenery. They are much more present and real than the buildings. And around Laurel Canyon, hitchhiking and sometimes even walking, go the GTOs. And so around Laurel Canyon, hitchhiking, sometimes even walking, go the GTOs, endlessly circulating, socializing, looking for the promised dream, and finding little more than mokes. Only the optimism of their youth keeping them going. Now remember, a lot of them die in a few years. There is a great sadness in this album and a great truth. It is more truthful than 90% of the albums in your local record store. It is produced by Frank Zappa, and it tells it like it really is. And for most people, that's incredibly hard to take. It's a wonderful album. So there's Miles still sucking up to Frank. He hasn't got mad at Frank yet, so he has to compliment the album. But he's right. And we can only say he's sucking up in retrospect, since he ends up, 30 years later or more, 30 or more years, writing a kind of very critical biography of Zappa. So he certainly doesn't talk to Frank, about Frank, like the way we talk about him. So it's interesting, though. It's called permanent damage. So they're in the extreme environment of Los Angeles. And Frank's documenting what happens to young people, young chemical bodies in that world. So Miles gets that. It's an important document. You know, these are pretty girls who can get access to the stars, but they have to deal with the regular all-American environment that everybody has to grow up in. So we enjoyed reading that. Let's see. It was a great experience reading that, wasn't it, Bert?
Yes. He was really a sociologist. I mean, it was Frank. What Frank did with the GTOs.
Like Frank, he's a sociologist, a journalist, and creative. See, since being creative, having original ideas in the old Gutenberg arts is a specialist role. You can't be a specialist in the global theater. You've got so much material around you, you can just start documenting them, and then you have a useful production. So, Picasso was not going around documenting the effects of the environment on his generations and painting it or recording it, making a movie of it. He stayed with the craft. Zappa is not limited to the craft.
Yes, but Warhol did that. He was into documenting the environment, the environment becoming the art form.
Yes. He's showing these people as effects of something else that's going on that requires a new kind of art.
And he could see that there is no more point in painting like artists used to do. And he goes into serigraphy and serial production and other types of experiments. Another type of lab, or like the Renaissance artists that had their workstations.
Yeah.
He's retrieving that type of environmental creation is not only the work of art, but also the documentation of the environment is the art.
Well, and he's being like Andy Warhol. He's managing an environment of conventional artists. In other words, he's not making the art. He can make the art, but he's showing young people trying to be artists. That's the only role model they have of some kind of autonomy or vitality. And Frank, these girls couldn't be businessmen, but Frank can do that, make art, and also be a businessman and a politician, surreptitiously preparing to run for president. Exactly what McLuhan was doing. So it's the fact that he is in a producer position like Andy Warhol. It's like McLuhan says, the pop artist turns his environment into an art form. So Zappa didn't have to just make art. He could turn his environment, the young women who hung around his home and what they did with their friends, that was an environment that Zappa could make a figure, make it archetypal, just by recording them. Okay, so here's another review of the GTOs by Scott Chin. This is an album that grows on you. When I opened it, I said to myself, Chin. That's his last name, Chin. I said to myself, Chin, I says, these girls are freaks, unquote. And then in a more humorous vein, I said, Chin, these girls are no talent freaks. See, the Gutenberg kid is looking for specialist things. It doesn't matter whether they have a talent or not. The same thing happened to the talented people. James Taylor, Neil Young, they all fucked up. They all had crack-ups. It doesn't matter whether you have a talent or not. There's a larger environment nailing you, a larger art form nailing you. That's what Zappa and McLuhan understood. So he's saying these are no-talent freaks. And he says, well, I was correct in my dubious attitude toward their musical skills, but their music is only a small part of the album, which is another thing. Altogether, I might add, which is another thing in another sentence. Altogether, I might add. So he double-checks his put-down. So he says the initials GTO stand for Girls Together Outrageously, also Girls Together Occasionally, Organically, Omphalocentrically, etc. The outrageously together girls are groupies of the Laurel Canyon variety. The album is produced by Frank Zappa, but surprisingly the girls are not merely a Zappa creation, as is Captain Beefheart, but a Zappa discovery, and a very happy one, I might add. Their style is original, unpretentious, and even ingenuous. Ingenuous groupies. As Zappa says in his intermittent notes, quote, the choice of subject is a reflection of the girl's own attitudes toward their environment. So he's talking about people interpreting the environment. Very McLuhan-esque.
Yeah.
Whereas Adorno talks about art objects and whether they're valid or not. Zappa is not looking at the art object as the big aesthetic battle. He's looking at how do you document this weird new environment. So then it says, he's looking at, as Zappa says in his intermittent notes, quote, the choice of subject is a reflection of the girl's own attitudes toward their environment, and the GTO's uniqueness lies, now this is what the reviewer says, and the GTO's uniqueness lies in the refreshing candor of their reflection. The personnel are as follows. Miss Pamela, now she goes on to become the most famous groupie in history, Pamela Des Barres. Miss Pamela, a blithe blonde whose love is all-embracing. So she's the ultimate perfect hippie girl. Somebody named Tra-La, and then there's Miss Sandra, whose personality clashes. Miss Cinderella, a redhead menace to American maidenhood. That means she's tries to de-virginize people or something. That was Miss Cinderella. Then there's Miss Christine. She'd be one on the cover of Hot Rats, who is poetic beyond rude. And then Miss Mercy, whose philosophy is mostly terse. All self-descriptions, I might add. So, I guess he's quoting what they said about themselves. So then the reviewer says, of the 17 cuts on the album, only 7 are set to music. And of these, the girls have had a hand in writing only 2. All the lyrics are theirs, however, as are the choral readings that make up the rest of the material. Musical assists are rendered by such guest talents as Jeff Beck, Nicky Hopkins, and Rod Stewart, and by several of the Mothers of Invention, including Zappa, on lewd, pulsating tambourine. So they get top stars to be on their album because they're the top groupies at that point. They all play well, of course, meaning the rock stars. They all play well, of course, but seem intentionally subdued in order to highlight the utter artlessness of the girls singing. None of the music is remarkable. None of the girls has a voice. Now, when I listened to the album, I loved the album, and I did not worry about whether they were fucking playing or not or had a voice. It was just good, fun. So the critic has to prop up the role of being a critic. He's supposed to have a socially functional role of saying, look, this is socially redeeming, and I'm telling you what's good and what will help you be educated or something. And he has to review utter non-instructive. What?
At the time, it was the time of the happening and performance art, and it was not only about the music. And maybe they were not seeing that they were trying to do something else, not to be rock singers, or they wanted to perform to make this type of happenings.
They wanted to have an entrance.
Art.
They wanted to have an entrance into the world of being interviewed, get into the mainstream entertainment shows or talk shows. That was the goal. You get attention if you get on Johnny Carson. So they were trying to come up with a way of getting attention, like Zappa got on Steve Allen's show, which had a big audience, by playing the bicycle. This is like a similar tent. The real art is to present yourself on a major talk show, and then some talent producer or something scouts you, and then you get put in a movie or something. And this reviewer is not noticing that. He's just trying to figure out whether this is a valid cultural artifact. And he's missing the other processes that the environment forces these girls to go through when you're living in L.A., when you have access to the showbiz world. You can, fuck your way through to the casting coach. That's what they were partly doing. But what was different, because there's so much media to engage in, who wants a job? Who wants to actually become a movie star or something where you have to work at it? They just were a side effect is get to the casting coach, but not the main thing. Whereas in the 30s and 40s, people fucked because they had to get a job. But these guys are sort of walling around in the abundance of American society, the software communism, where they can live off people. You couldn't live off people so blatantly in the 30s and 40s, 50s. So this is a new post-human situation. And the reviewers, because they don't know McLuhan, are looking in, pre-1945 value judgments. They don't know how to read it. Like, you don't see McLuhan evaluating the cultural values of the hippie counterculture. He's explaining what they are responding to, why it's a natural knee-jerk reaction by the hippies. They're robots of the new effects. So he's there. This guy's in a quandary. I don't know if I should be reviewing this. None of the music is remarkable. None of the girls has a voice. Utter artlessness of the singing. Most of the compositions are facile, but eminently forgettable little items on the order of many mothers. Oh, Jesus Christ, he's putting down Zappa, saying Zappa's that is unbelievable. But here's the point. People don't have a clue of how much Frank is going to produce, how much he had produced and hadn't been released. They haven't heard the concerts. I was going to say this hours ago. You hear on the bootlegs Zappa doing songs that you never hear him do again. He does them once or twice, and they're never done, and they're really good, and they don't get it on albums or anything. He has huge inventory stuff to play. So if you're just going by the albums, you end up saying there's no art, there's no product there. Because Zappa was editing Lumpy Gravy, We're Only for the Money, and Absolutely Free for a different sociological, Manipian purpose. He wasn't there trying to have, 8 songs and have a hit. He was showing the seamless web of the global theater. So, there'd be tunes that would be cut short or interrupted or satirized. It's not until you hear Hot Rats that people are shocked. Holy shit, Frank can actually play, a 6-minute fucking amazing composition. They hadn't heard it. So they say the songs are utterly limited and forgettable, like the Mother's Invention tunes. So we're looking at Zappa being an invisible environment himself. On one end, you have the song called The Captain's Fat Teresa Shoes, dealing with Captain Beefheart's spiffy footwear. The girls sound almost like a legitimate pop group when they do that song, while the song, and we played it last week, the Eureka Springs Garbage Lady, throws their charming amateurishness into relief. Now, McLuhan used to talk about that the amateur was more important than the professional in the TV age. The amateurish is not a specialist. He's not hot. He's cool. So the charmingness of the amateurishness of the GTOs is appropriate. Here's Zappa, an expert specialist, celebrating amateurs. And maybe he read McLuhan. Maybe he didn't understand it, but he just read that part of Medium is a Massage where McLuhan says, amateurs are better for our time. They're cooler. They're not specialists. So anyways, he throws their, in that song, the song throws their charming amateurishness into relief. Miss Mercy has the strongest voice, although no real demands are ever made on it. and displays it on a song called I Have a Paintbrush in My Hand to Color a Triangle. Celebrating, and this song is celebrating a strange menage a trois. And on this other song called The Ghost Chained, look at this, The Ghost Chained to the Past, Present, and Future. That's a good title. The Ghost Chained to the Past, Present, and Future. And it is her own mournful composition. A mournful. Then it says the most enjoyable cuts are simple recitations. One song is called Who's Jim Socks? It's an emetic girls' locker room remember when. An emetic girls' locker room remember when. I don't know what emetic means. I have to look that up, maybe. Another song, Wouldn't It Be Sad If There Were No Cones? I think that was their name for black people, black guys. And then another song, The Monkey Monster Review. These are the girls' reminiscences of abortive pickups by spades and friendly lifts, friendly car hitchhiking. The girls' reminiscence of abortive pickups by spades and friendly lifts, respectively. So I guess wouldn't it be sad if there were no cones? That means come-ons, and then the Moke Monster refers to being picked up by some driver. The best cut of the album concerns Rodney Bingenheimer. Someday, look at a documentary on him. He's an interesting L.A. phenomenon. He was like a runaway kid who ended up being protected by Sonny and Cher, right at the peak of Sonny and Cher's, mid-'60s recording stardom. So because they liked him and took this lost kid in, he got to go to the studios and be behind the scenes in the music industry, get access to the stars. So he was having the dream that a lot of teenagers wanted, and it led to him to being a man about town, and eventually was considered the mayor of Sunset Strip. And then he got his own radio show, and he promoted punk when it first started and interviewed everybody. So he's the unacknowledged countercultural leader for Generation X. He's not a baby boomer kind of leader. Now, he's a basket case by the time they do this documentary. Like, he's adult and still trying to be a DJ, but he's gradually been reduced to like a 2-hour show on Sunday night. So he's being decomposed, but he was a friend of Frank on the Strip. So check that out. Rodney Bingenheimer, Bingenheimer. Interesting documentary about what happens to somebody who's stuck in one technology with pop and rock music, and that's his ticket, and then he has to be a DJ, and then newer media obsoletes the role of a DJ. So then they're calling him the Sunset Strip foremost male groupie. So he's a male groupie. Now, they do a song, it's called A Chanted Sketch, and it's interspersed with Rodney's own breathless lavender name-dropping and his noisy bottle of Diet Right. There are also a couple of taped phone conversations of groupies comparing notes on fave raves in the hilarious girl talk tone of a pajama party, which call for a redefinition of coyness. So that would be their conversations with the Plastercasters. All in all, the put-ons are obvious. The singing is atrocious. The gross-outs are numerous. And a cutesy, boasting spirit is very much in evidence. Cutesy, boasting spirit. Sounds like Payday. The put-ons are obvious. The singing is atrocious. The gross-outs are numerous. And a cutesy, boasting spirit by Bob and Connie is very much in evidence. Now, when you hear what we did with Dave Neufeld, they'd have to and amazing scientific laboratory work they'd have to add to this list here, right? But the GTOs are so frank, so Bob and Connie are so frank, so unencumbered by convention, and so unaccountably charming that Payday is definitely worth the effort of getting a friend to listen to it. And it's quite entertaining, I might add. See? There it is. That's the description of Payday. Bob and Connie are so frank, so unencumbered by convention, and so unaccountably charming that Payday is definitely worth the effort of getting a friend to listen to it. And quite entertaining, I might add. Isn't that nice? There it is. It turned out to be all about Bob in the end.
Now that we know we are all GTOs, today is
what'd you say?
February 14th.
What'd you say? We are our own GTOs? We are all GTOs, yes.
We are all.
I've always said we're little girls. I've always said that Bob's a little girl. We're all little girls. That was said way back on See Kill Him. We're all little girls, and we're little girls together outrageously. And we got our daddy, Ion, is our uncle and daddy is mixing it in with us. He's a perverted daddy who hangs out with the kids. But it would be great if Pamela DeBar, if Pamela DeBar had any fucking luck, she would hear this. What? You don't know where I am? What did you say?
No, here is already February 14th, the day of love.
Valentine's. The day of friendship. That's right. Yeah. The day of friendship.
The day of the forest field.
The forest field day, right. But what would Pamela DeBar, if she heard this, what we've been saying, would she be smart enough, cool enough to realize this is the most amazing thing that she'd ever heard said about Frank Zappa and about herself? Would she have the guts to call up and engage? Well, she's kind of a neat girl. Maybe she would, but
we have to invite her for an interview, or an interaction.
I don't know.
Reunion.
Maybe. Why don't you do that? If you could email them, I mean, you're a charismatic person. If I ask them, their manager fucking Googles me, and within 5 minutes the manager says, you will not go near this guy. I don't know what the fuck he is, but he's fucking dangerous. You know, the manager will not let them go near me. So you do it.
I'm going to ask her if she's still damaged.
Yes. Now, you know what she does? She travels around. She travels around, let's say, North America, putting on writers' workshops, and only women are allowed to go to it. So you could go to one of her workshops and astound her, and then she'll want to be your friend, and you'll say, well, you ought to see what I do on Saturday night. You ought to come out and hang out with me on Saturday night. Aha. Here's what's neat. So Zappa formed a band from the Hot Rats album called Hot Rats. So the album comes out in October. He's not doing Mother's Invention, and he breaks up the Mothers, and people say, well, I guess Frank's finished. He's leaving the business. He then becomes so fucking busy, he gets an amazing, innovative album out. He's touring as a Beef Arts manager. He's over in Europe. He's making albums with Jean-Luc Ponty. He's doing all this stuff. And then he also forms another band called Hot Rats. And that was March 7th, 1970. Now, Carol and I were up in Seattle taking development courses from Cosmic Awareness and Dave Neufeld, Dave Worcester, and we go down to L.A. to see Krishnamurti, to see Frank. I'd been in touch with Frank for years, and to meet Jodan Sloan, the guy making the D-Cell. So we have an incredible number of good weeks there, and but I get to see Zappa's new group. Now, this is where, I'd seen some of the early Mother's Invention. I never saw their first gigs in 65, 66, but I did see the Garrick Theater in New York in 67. But now he's starting a new cycle, and I get to see their first, the new Frank, the new band, the next cycle. I saw him there at the beginning. So here's a LA Times review of that concert. So it says, Old Time Spirit Revived. Frank Zappa and his new ensemble called Hot Rats, also the name of his latest album, took the stage at the immense Olympic Auditorium Saturday night, following long, throbbing blues and rock-filled sets by a band called Bigfoot, Mountain, and the dynamic Johnny Winter. So 3 bands played before Frank. I remember seeing Mountain and maybe Johnny Winter. I don't know if I saw Bigfoot. So following long, throbbing blues and rock-filled sets by those bands. It says Mountain and the dynamic Johnny Winter. I guess those are 2 different bands. Now, I remember Zappa came on, and that song, The Spirit in the Sky, was very popular on the AM radio. Zappa comes on, so he's commenting on the top song immediately. He goes, and this is a guy who doesn't listen to pop music, but I assume this is what he's doing. He comes out, and the first words he says, "The monster in the sky," reflecting the spirit in the sky. And, this monster theme, Return of the Son of Monster Magnet. So this journalist says, Zappa's opening remarks included a reference to the El Monte Legion Stadium, which in the 50s and early 60s saw weekend stands of several tousled groups competing in battles of the bands for prizes and more valued public notice. Saturday Night at the Olympic revived the spirit of those times. Bigfoot, a blues rock quintet from L.A., turned out over an hour's worth of full-bodied sounds. They proved stronger and more professional than their low billing would have implied. Then followed Big Mountain. It took 3 songs for them to get their sloppy set together, and they often seemed close to coming undone again. The drums were unspectacular, the bass guitar often weak, and the electric organ largely innocuous. Now, the Big Mountain is like referring to Leslie West. He was this huge guy. So only Leslie West on lead guitar and vocals, playing effortlessly and often brilliantly, anchored the group. But when they blended, they were powerful, pulling riffs from a bag of musical tricks, reaching back to rock and roll and running up through Hendrix. Johnny Winter, rain dancing across the stage, exceeded his growing reputation. His brand of Delta blues is almost unconscious. His brother, backing him up on organ, sax, drums, and vocals, was unbelievable. When, after several long warm-up songs, they launched into the rock classic Johnny B. Goode, they underscored the evening. A jamming, piercing 20-minute rendition of Tobacco Road worked over the mesmerized crowd like a bomb, B-A-L-M. Then, over 4 hours after the concert began, Zappa and Hot Rats. Now, I was only there to see Frank, so I'm waiting for Frank, and I don't remember paying too much attention to these bands. I figured Zappa would be way beyond them, no comparison, so put up with this crap until Frank shows up. So, what's your bet that Frank does lousy in this review? So they say, then over 4 hours after the concert began, Zappa and Hot Rats. With Sugarcane Harris on electric violin, Ian Underwood on organ and sax, Ainsley Dunbar excellent on drums, Max Bennett on bass guitar, and Zappa, of course, playing his rhythm leads and smoking a cigarette. At nearly 2 a.m, they began to play. They started with, quote, "I Would Be So Delighted," a rangy rock and roll blues song. Then Zappa conducted them through a waltzy rock tune, and they sailed into Harris's arrangement of Little Richard's Directly From My Heart to You. These fine preliminaries completed, they all began jamming in that experimental, digressive, jazz-oriented style that Zappa has evolved since leaving Legion Stadium. Well, since leaving the early 60s. Now, Zappa used to hang out with the bands at the El Monte Legion Stadium, and he did a song about the El Monte Legion Stadium in the early 60s. It was sort of a minor hit, sung by somebody. I can't remember who sang it, but he wrote that. That was back when he was in Cucamonga at Paul Buff's studio. It says, the music quite simply proselytizes. That means it's a propaganda. It tries to teach. The music quite simply proselytizes. It conjures a feeling of a Turkish bazaar, yet all the while stays faithful to rock and roll and jazz. The electric violin contrived lilting eddies against a smooth liquid flow from Zappa and his fellow players. And as Zappa stated earlier, all liked them. All 5,000 of us at 3 a.m. Well, man, he got a good review. I am surprised. Everybody likes Frank. I don't remember being that late. Maybe. I remember walking around. I hadn't been in L.A. for a while, so it was new. Coming into the new decade, I remember observing the people, the young kids, and it was the beginning of the post-college student baby boomers. Now, even the working class was starting to grow long hair, and the heavy metal thing was starting. So walking around looking at this, was one thing. But at the end, I went down to the back where Zappa would exit. So he comes off the back of the stage, and all these kids come running up to him, sort of saying, "Hey, Frank, do this, do this." They're all trying to get him to pay attention, and they want to audition for his band or have him sign something or give him money or get money. So there's panic around him. And Frank slowly walks through them, and he keeps walking down the back alley with these kids, half of them following, most giving up. But he has this real tight gay boy bum. So I noticed when you walked along, his bum sort of stuck out, and he had an odd walk. And I don't know what I mean by gay boy bum, but he didn't have a masculine walk. He had a pinched ass like a fucking poodle. He walked like a poodle, that's what it was. And stupid little bum. And I remember talking to his mistress, Nigel Lennon. She really laughed when I pointed out, because she had noticed it. No one else had ever talked about it. But he had his bum was a snob. That's what it was. He's walking along. He's got some stupid high-heel shoes on, and he's purposeful, and he's taller than everybody, it seems, and he's going straight to some place. He's not interested in anybody. And so he's a snob in his mind, but his bum showed snobbishness more than his mind. It really was quite striking. So that's what I remember, watching him off. Now, I didn't go backstage to see him because I had to go talk to Dave Worster and Joe Sloan because they came and picked us up. So, and I had seen Frank 2 days before. So with all these people around him, I didn't try to hang out with him. I just remember him walking off and being quite disgusted with his bum. I really thought that guy, he's like what Beefheart called a Martian. He's a fucking weirdo. It's a weird body language coming off him. You didn't see it from the front. You saw it from the back. And it was just amazing how he was just walking rather fast and so purposeful, ignoring the kids, scrambling around him, but kind of emanating friendly openness, but just kept moving. I think most people dropped off and said, "This fucking guy's weird." I'm getting away from this guy. I don't know what he is.
And Beefheart called him Martian, Bob. Did you say that?
Yes, Beefheart called him
Frank as a Martian.
Yeah. Which I had forgotten about. And Beefheart, in 1971, a year and a half later, he's telling me up near Palo Alto and Stanford University that Zappa is a no-talent asshole and a good engineer, but that's all. And when he heard that Dave Wally was writing a book about him, he said, "Let me call that guy and disabuse him of that project. Tell him he's making a fucking mistake writing a book about Zappa." He was very pissed off. And he also was starting to get a lot of attention, so he was starting to become... He's on the way becoming more significant than Frank, but he wasn't a good enough businessman and a practical enough guy to pull it off, so he just collapsed. He didn't make it. He was too crazy or something, too eccentric. But I was there right in the middle, and among Beefheart fans, like Matt Groening, the creator of the Simpsons. When he said, you knew Don in 71, 72 when he was really rising? I said, yep, I was right there, up there in Ben Lomond with him. I even jammed with him. Got chewed out for looking at him while I was jamming, but I got to bang the drums or whatever instrument I was playing. And then we talked for a while with the band, and the band, I could tell they were like quiet and subdued. And years later, it came out that Beefheart ran it like a cult. He intimidated all of them, scared the shit out of these guys, and they were all frozen in this tough situation of learning this complex music, but being really mad at Don, and he was a tantrum guy, and really bullied them. This all came out in books later. I did notice there was an odd, quiet, and paranoid look in the band, Zudo and Rollo and Jimmy Siemens. They had all these weird names. And they were just sitting there sullenly listening to Beefheart go on about whenever he played football, he couldn't stand it because it reminded him of his father's shoes. Whenever he held the football, the leather, for some reason, bugged him because he didn't like his father's shoes. And he was making these eccentric, sensory eccentric statements. I was enjoying it, and I had been with him before, but it was what do you call it, an unfriendly kind of scene. Something was lurking. I didn't know how he'd run his band. I only knew him separately. So when we get out we're getting ready to leave, and he's there with Janet, his wife, and he's saying, "You guys are going to hitchhike that back to L.A.?" And we said, "Yep." He said, "That is fucking nuts. You're going to get killed." And he was really worried about us. Now, this is in July 71. This is a year after Manson, and the scene has changed in California. People are afraid to hitchhike because of the murders of 69, 70. And we didn't even think about that. California was a good place to hitchhike in. We didn't know that people were scared, having been back in Europe and the East Coast. We didn't know this California change. And so we got picked up by this guy, this beefy guy who drove us a great distance, and he didn't say anything. And eventually we found out that he was a football player for the is it the LA Rams? Does that sound like that, the football team? I think it's the LA Rams, right? And
yes.
After a while I started wondering, I said, uh-oh, we got picked up by a psychopath. He wasn't friendly. He just didn't say a word, just sullen, big guy, and just sitting there driving. He wasn't even charmed by Carolyn. That's pretty bad if you can't get charmed by Carolyn. We always counted on her charming people if they were potential psychopaths. But he seemed about ready to explode, sullenly mentioned his football thing, and it was a very uncomfortable ride. So Dan Beefheart almost had his prophecy come true. I almost got killed by this psychopath. but so we did have a paranoid ride. But I just remember Beefheart was shocked that we were hitchhiking, and but we knew we were protected. We were on a mission for Bob. We were spreading the D-cell. We probably told the guy about the D. So, this is another. Okay, Miles is pretty good. There's another article by Miles. It might be worth listening to what he says. There is this press release where Frank explains what happened to the mothers, what different people were doing. We won't read that, but the framing statements by Miles might be interesting. He says, many people say they don't like the mothers, but when pressed, usually it turns out that they haven't listened to them for 3 years or so. Those people should read this totally biased review with an open mind. So he's admitting he's biased. When Zappa disbanded the mothers, he issued the following press release. The bits in italics are my annotations and not part of Zappa's text. So you get this talking about the history of the mothers. Then Miles says, Zappa has not only written the arrangements, he's cut the master tapes to pieces and backed bits of tape from one number against bits from another number to create new tunes and themes. The results are fantastic. Then next thing he says, the Beatles were certainly aware of the Mother's Freak Out album when they were planning Sgt. Pepper. And the next thing he says, that's it. End of release. So then he comes in and he says, in the above press release, Zappa showed his disappointment at having to fold the band. He shows his sadness that his old slogan, no commercial potential, proved true at last. And that no commercial potential was said by Don, whatever his name was. The guy went on to be a mainstream super producer, very wealthy guy. Don something. No commercial potential. He said, you guys have no commercial potential. Proved true at last. And it shows, the press release shows his anger at the total lack of public support for experimentation in music. Now, this is Zappa going through the grind of doing this, but we as consumers thought he was a fucking big success. He had the best albums. It was an awesome amount of stuff. Good concert. And we didn't think he was a failure, but he had to fucking do it. He had to make it. He had to make money, but we were just consuming him, and he was awesome. His anger at the total lack of public support for experimentation in music. Then Miles has in brackets, the term underground music now being just a sales hype for trivia produced by trashy groups who can do a 12-bar blues. Total lack of public support for experimentation in music. I guess that means for underground music, but it's been co-opted. Support. Okay, Zappa showed his disappointment. He shows his sadness. And his anger at the total lack, Zappa's right. I don't get that. Then it says, no, really underground group. So you have superficial underground music. Then he says, Zappa's right. No, really underground group has yet made it big, has had public support and encouragement on anywhere near large scale, or had a sympathetic record company. So he's saying that Zappa was a really underground group. And even though you got underground music being pushed by the record companies, nowhere near the underground and the environment that Frank is. Then he says, witness the Fugs, the Vanilla Fudge, the United States of America, Captain Beefheart, the Soft Machine, etc. Even the Jefferson Airplane have reportedly terrible troubles with RCA Victor. So I guess he's saying that the Fugs, the Vanilla Fudge, the United States of America, Captain Beefheart, Soft Machine are the more real underground groups. Then he says, the Mothers have gone. It is extremely unlikely that they will reform, and Frank knows it. Now, they did reform with Hot Rats, and he went on, just continued making bands, making new bands. So people didn't understand that Zappa, that the Mothers, though legendary, weren't that important to Frank. He could drop them and then keep forming new anti-environmental according to the public requirements. So for him, it wasn't as dramatic. Miles was fooled by this. He says, they're not going to reform, and Frank knows it. Even if they did reform, the rigors of rehearsal and the amount of time needed to get them back into shape would make it impossible to reach the old standard of craftsmanship. People just grow apart, and now they are apart. The financial burden of an 8-piece group plus equipment handlers being far too great for their income. That means from gigs and record sales. However, the tapes exist, and they are wonderful tapes. Now, he used to visit Frank and get to hear some of these tapes. Miles at that time, wrote the best articles on Zappa. He had access to Frank's scene. Stored in his basement studio, Frank has tapes of himself with Captain Beefheart recorded in 1964, singing dirty songs and doing Rolling Stones-esque numbers, but weird. Now, people didn't know that. I knew it, but in general, it was new knowledge to know that Frank had taped so much stuff. Then he says, and Miles, I guess, heard some of it. Zappa has amazing live tapes from the Whiskey A Go-Go, including the one of the night they were discovered by Herbie Cohen. And he goes, that's something. Miles said, that's amazing. Tapes from concerts in Florida where a groupie got on stage with them and had a dancing contest with Motorhead for a $20 prize. Tapes from all over Europe, not only in concert, but dialogues in changing rooms. Not only in concert, but dialogues in changing rooms. Recording on the road, in coaches or buses, airport waiting rooms, rehearsals, etc., etc. Some really fantastic stuff. So Frank would use Barry Miles to let this information out. He let Miles hang out and hang out, which for real Zappa fans was the ideal position. You would have loved to be with Frank and him playing, his stuff to you. It would have been the ultimate art experience of that day. Much of it, in fact, Zappa can't use unless Warner Brothers and MGM did a deal or joint release, because the Mothers' contract with MGM specified exclusivity of material, meaning that Zappa can't release other versions of songs which are on MGM albums, on Warner Brothers albums, on MGM albums or on Warner Brothers albums. Thus, some of the amazing live versions of, say, No, you haven't. We've been through that before. It doesn't last. Something tremendous will happen, and you'll want to be part of it. So, Zappa says how dumb they are, and Don Preston says, but they do scream for more when we do a good show. Zappa says, they scream for more and more because they paid X amount of dollars to get in, and they want the max amount of entertainment for their money. It's got nothing whatever to do with what you play. Stick any group on there and let them play to the end of the show. So Frank's saying it's the medium is the message. He says there's no content. Doesn't matter what the content is, the kids are there so they can get in the act and yell and scream or something. The journalist says, do you have a solution to this situation? Zappa says, yeah. Holy shit, he says it right here. Yeah, I'm not going to tour anymore. Holy shit. He announced it. He doesn't say he's breaking up the band, but I'm not going to tour anymore. Then, and this was published, 2 months later after he announced it. Then the journalist says, then I asked some questions which amounted to, quote, will rock survive? Zappa says, rock, to the jazz guy, will rock survive? Zappa says, rock won't die. It will go through some changes, but it ain't going to die. They predicted too many times in the past. Remember, quote, the limbo is coming in. Rock and roll is dead, unquote. There have even been some concerted efforts to kill it. But it will survive because there will always be several very smart producers and record companies who are interested in giving people what they want instead of what they need. Ooh, he says they need something. So he goes back to describing the concert. During the concert, the mothers play several long numbers where everybody gets a chance to blow. Since several of the players have extensive jazz backgrounds, that's Don Preston, Bunk Gardner and his brother, and Ian Underwood, their playing in this context clarifies the differences between jazz and rock improvisation. And their playing in this context clarifies the difference between jazz and rock improvisation. An essential quality of the jazz solo is the sense it conveys of forward movement through time, which is the result, I think, says the journalist, of the jazz soloist's role, in even the simplest context, establishing and revealing his identity. In the typical rock solo, this kind of forward movement rarely occurs. Instead, there is an amount of space to be decorated, with the emotional curve, in brackets, excitement to ecstasy, a foregone conclusion. That's why many jazz listeners find rock solos boring, no matter how well played. They're like someone brought up on Beethoven who listens to a raga and says, quote, I dig the rhythm, but we're going around in circles. Where's the development? Is that what a Westerner thinks of the Indian music, Roxy? We're going around in circles? Hey? No comment? In many rock solos, guitar solos especially, there's a theatrical relation between the player and what he's playing. And we'll do that again. In many rock solos, guitar solos especially, there's a theatrical relation between the player and what he's playing. And the most exciting parts occur when it sounds as if what he's playing has got the upper hand. The drama is that he's conjured up a screaming musical monster, supposedly, and now the beast threatens to overcome him. The excitement comes from watching him master the beast, surrender to it, or get even all together and smash or burn the instrument. When someone like Jimi Hendrix presents this sexual fantasy, it can be Wagnerian. This is what the journalist writes. And he says, the mothers undercut this setup quite neatly. The soloists go through the outward motions of getting hot, but the precision of accent and the care they give to motivic development prevent any loss of control effect. The reaction of the audience to this was curious. Zappa would stomp off a number that had, watch out, explosion ahead, written all over it, and the people around me would murmur, yeah, and a blank look of anticipated ecstasy would settle on their faces. By the end of the piece, no explosion had occurred, and they looked vaguely bewildered, although they applauded, of course. What do you think of that, guys? Any comment, Eben?
I guess I kind of sense a little bit that he didn't necessarily connect with the audience, and it's hard, I think, for creators that are ahead of their time to expect to be understood. But he was out there, and he did it, and he made such an impact, and so. I mean, that's all you can really do, is just to do it for yourself, and hopefully people will get it.
Yep. Okay. It says, you have anything to say, Roxy? Maybe Roxy's not there anymore. Seems her number is still there. Okay. The Mothers have made 6 albums, and Absolutely Free, We're Only In It for the Money, and Uncle Meat are worthy of anyone's attention. Their first album, Freak Out, is interesting, but unformed compared to the others. Mother Mania is an anthology, and Reuben and the Jets an extreme parody of 50s rock and roll. It doesn't mean much to me, since I never got to that music the first time around. So he thinks it's a parody, and not limited to that. Listening to all the albums in one sitting reveals an interesting facet of Zappa's musical procedure. In the pieces with lyrics, the often elaborate rhythmic and melodic patterns are tied directly to the words. One beat and one note to each syllable with few large melodic intervals. Let's read that again. No, I'll finish the paragraph and redo it. This effect carries over into the instrumental pieces, where the tight rhythmic melodic motifs expand and contract as if they had a life of their own. It's an airy, bracing music, and the play of intelligence in it is so prominent that one must respond in kind. I'll read that paragraph again. Listening to all the albums in one sitting reveals an interesting facet of Zappa's musical procedure. In the pieces with lyrics, the often elaborate rhythmic and melodic patterns are tied directly to the words. One beat and one note to each syllable, with few large melodic intervals. This effect carries over into the instrumental pieces, where the tight, rhythmic, melodic motifs expand and contract as if they had a life of their own. It's an airy, bracing music, and the play, I like that, airy, bracing music, and the play of intelligence in it is so prominent that one must respond in kind. Zappa thinks that Uncle Meat is, quote, the best album in terms of overall quality, but his favorite music is on Lumpy Gravy, the album where he directs a large orchestra. It's hard for me to tell why he thinks so, since what comes through is a collage of rock and classical parodies that are disconnected by any standards. What comes through is a collage of rock and classical parodies that are disconnected by any standards. Perhaps he has in mind the album Lumpy Gravy. Perhaps he has in mind the album Lumpy Gravy might have been. Perhaps he has in mind, since he says his favorite music, what it might have been, since both he and Bunk Gardner mentioned that the Los Angeles studio men on the date were unable to cope with some of the music and played without much spirit and what they did manage to record. Then it says, Frank Zappa might be described as a cultural guerrilla. He sees that the popular arts are propagandistic in the broad sense. Even when they masquerade as rebellion, they lull us into fantasy and homogenize our responses. So he infiltrates the machine and attempts to make the popular forms defeat their traditional ends. His music doesn't lull, it tries to make you think. Obviously, he's balanced on a narrow edge. On the one hand, he's faced with an audience whose need for homogeneous response is so great that they can make his creations fit their desires. On the other hand, he must in some way reach a mass audience or his efforts are useless. And of course, there's money too. He's only human. But now listen to this. But whatever the outcome, there is still the music. And if any of us are around in 20 years, I think we'll be listening to it. Well, you got that right. Now, we're going to go over to an article by David Wally. David Wally, he wrote one of the first rock biographies. It was a biography of Zappa. And I knew him at the time. And there's from November 10th, 69. What's that? Somebody say something? From November 10th, 1969, David Wally writes an article. It says he's a music critic for the East Village Other. That means he worked for Walter Boert and Jazz and Pop magazine. This guy goes on in the 70s to have a semi-career as a Zappa expert. What did he say in 1969? Has he decided to write the book yet? I don't think so. So he's thinking. Now, he's a graduate of Yale University, someplace like that. He's a cultural historian, and he's got the guts of looking at Frank and saying, what are we going to do with this guy? So, and now he's saying this after the breakup. So David Wallace says, the mothers are dead. At least that was what the press release said a few days ago. The mothers are dead as a performing unit for a few months. But the way things look at present, they'll not be performing together except on albums. No more performances. No more fiendish Frank's mustache and scowl. Quote, laying on you some heavy blues licks, unquote. No more Jimmy Carl Black, the Indian of the group. Blowing minds. No more Ian Underwood sax solos. To me, the idea of the mothers not gigging is an unmitigated disaster, not only for the musicians, but more importantly for the audiences who will be deprived of good music. Frank's music strained one's senses. It was music that made one think beyond British blues, beyond B.B. King guitar riffs, or superstar ego-tripping and publicity-hype games. Music that made one think beyond British blues, B.B. King guitar riffs, or superstar ego-tripping and publicity-hype games. Admittedly, Frank himself had much to do with killing the group. He wanted something his audiences couldn't give him. He wanted understanding. Not that he was a freak, which he wasn't, and needed comprehension. Not that he was a freak, which he wasn't, and needed comprehension. No. Frank wanted something which was impossible to gain from his audience. The composer and a musician, not a pop performer. To be a musician in an age, or indeed a decade, which demands personalities is hard. For a generation which has been raised on hype, it was doubly hard to comprehend when a musician played music without the trimmings and the visuals which normally go with pop music. For a generation which has been raised on hype, it was doubly hard to comprehend when a musician played music without the trimmings and the visuals which normally go with pop music. The mothers had their own set of crazy visuals, but they were incidental to their music. Frank thought that if enough people saw him because he was strange, because he cursed on stage, or because in his younger days he used to slop coffee all over his instruments, people would listen to his music. Frank thought that if he did that, people would listen to his music. He was right and wrong about this approach. Apparently people came to see the mothers because of their visuals, not because of their music. People came to see a show, not to be turned on to a form which was far ahead of his time. Frank became the victim of his own outrageous behavior. He became trapped by his own gags. People listened to him for the wrong reasons. It was the hip thing to do, the hip thing to laugh at the mothers and their music. Oh yeah, Frank's a freak, and the members of his band are out of sight. Yeah, sure. He can really play those old 50s rock numbers, and with such style, too. Oh yeah, Frank Zappa, he's such a funny man. And so on. I've heard it many times. The mothers passed out of the performing era because that was the only thing that could be done. There was nothing else left. Quote, nothing to be done, unquote, like Beckett said in Waiting for Godot. I suspect that Frank as well was waiting for the mythical Godot. Though unidentified in the play, perhaps Godot represented understanding, the understanding Frank never got from the public. His public, though, expected that Frank act a part of the clown, the iconoclast. But under that facade was, and still is, a serious, dedicated, and angry composer. Zappa's music may have sounded a little cute at times and complex at other times. It was. Frank was committed, as were the mothers, not to turning people onto drugs, not to blowing people's minds with dynamite fiery blues riffs. His music was dedicated to turning you inward, to make you reflect on your own environment. Then he lists a few song titles. Plastic People, America Drinks and Goes Home, Trouble Coming Every Day, I'm Losing Status at the High School. Those were a few of his more well-known numbers. And then people used to shout out in the middle of his concerts when there was a lull, play Louie Louie. Some joke that was. Frank wanted to do something more than entertain people. He wanted to educate people's ears by not giving them what they wanted. Perhaps Frank wanted too much by wanting people to listen instead of consuming his music. Perhaps Frank wanted too much by wanting people to listen instead of consuming his music. People, because they didn't want to be bothered, saw Frank for a freak, and all they expected from him was freakiness. What they didn't get, when they didn't get that, they booed or taunted him. Frank reacted by disdaining his audiences. Continue over here. All right. Frank, where are we at? Frank reacted by disdaining his audience's sensibilities. He realized that those who went to see him weren't interested in anything more than themselves being at a Mother's concert telling their friends how strange Frank was that night, or what he said to hecklers. The show was more important than the music, the medium more important than the message. His albums were bought more for curiosity than for what they said, something to terrorize parents. When Frank did Lumpy Gravy and then Uncle Meat, perhaps people thought he had gone too far. No wisecracks, no catchy lyrics, nothing but pure music. Not electronic wah-wah freak-out electric ladybird music, but music that was better than anything being ground out by the atonal anti-masters who had infested America's music schools. Read that again. But not electronic wah-wah freak-out electric ladybird music, but music that was better than anything being ground out by the atonal anti-masters who had infested America's music schools. It was music that was so much better that it should have been played for those people. It was music that was so much better that it should have been played for those people who tyrannized their atonal knowledge over the younger, more impressionable composers who were still unfortunately involved in the university scene. Read that again. It was music that was so much better that it should have been played for those people who tyrannized their atonal knowledge over the younger, more impressionable composers who were still unfortunately involved in the university scene. Frank was dedicated to his music as the mothers were dedicated to playing it, burps and all. Few understood the import of his music. Perhaps this will now change, since both he and they will not be on the cultural stump anymore. Why did Frank break up the band? He was going into production of other people's records and some films he'd been working on for the past 3 years. Yes, that's the reason, the official reason why he decided to stop beating his brains out for a majority of people who refuse to listen. When will they publicly perform again? The master said, quote, "It is possible that at a later date, when audiences have properly assimilated the recorded work of the group, a reformation might take place." Unquote. Maybe Frank is too far ahead of his time. Maybe he should go into retirement. Then again, all great artists are way ahead of the general public. For the sake of the musical form in which Frank was working, it is hoped that he will again meet his public. Maybe then he won't be forced to play Louie Louie for 16 hours at a time to satisfy the popular notion of pop culture or pop entertainment. It is a consummation devotedly to be wished, and time will tell. So that's the author. Oop. Is that you coming back, Roxy? Have you come back to speak? Nope. Bert. No. Bart. Are you yearning to say something?
Thanks for unmuting me.
You're welcome. I don't know if Roxy's gone, but you may be subbing in for Roxy.
Yes, I caught some of that. It's interesting what Roxy's going through on this phone call, what I've heard so far. She's evoked statements from you about getting a position and your arguments with. Right. What's happening? What are you doing? And she's whether she was joking or not, she was running out of steam on things. I couldn't tell if she was picking up your traits.
You mean she
just being phatic? Yep. What were you?
Go ahead. To ask Bart. Or no, Bert. What do you think, Bert?
At first I thought she was being emphatic, but at the... No, I thought she was at first being emphatic, but in the end, she's very serious because she kept repeating that this is her final payday.
Yeah, I've noted you and you and Roxy Bert have basically kept up with Bob for hours and hours and hours. So many shows. I've just considered these sort of late night hours, the Bert, Roxy, and Bob segment. Zappa or otherwise, but really, Titanic. The length of time you guys have put in, and have kept it going. It's
120 hours. Bart, it's
at least
about 119, 120 hours right now. Not at least. That's what it is. I know precisely what it is.
120 between you, Bert, and Roxy, or on this payday. Well, not on this payday, but I guess it would be between you, Bert, and Roxy.
No. This whole series, we started back in October. It was 113 hours before tonight. We may have done about 7 hours total here on the Zappa part, so that's 120 hours. Add that to 113.
Yeah, and reflecting back, I would say that it was necessary, and it's listening to all of the ionic sort of overtones with Zappa's life and career, and also that he's on your chart. It's necessary to document that, and I think you guys did a very complete job in doing that.
Yes.
You've done hundreds of hours on McLuhan. You've done a lot on probably Croker, but I don't know if you've done archives for them specifically yet. Just McLuhan and Zappa. But I can see
not Croker.
And you've done Croker.
No, we haven't done much. We haven't done a series. There's nobody who can read Croker that I could do it with.
I got you. Okay.
Well, I don't see you reading Croker.
Well, there was a lot
complex,
that
that's for sure.
Oh yeah,
quite complex.
Yeah, I mean that's just one of the.
What'd you say, Bert? There's a lot of what?
I said Croker is quite complex. Quite complex to read.
Yeah, and there's also I'm still getting settled here, and that's why I've kind of been intermittently still on the calls. I'm physically doing work at my home here, but there are things that are on my reading list. Mark Hansen is still one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's I've been surprised that Bert and Roxy have been hanging in as long and as consistently as they have, just because. And maybe it's just the hour, but typically there are a lot of distractions that are pulling people away for whatever reason, jobs and so on. But they've held forth. I'm impressed.
Yeah, they did a good accomplishment.
Just checking.
And we could do more.
Oh yeah, no, I'm just saying.
Basically, we've done.
You've done?
We've done early interviews. No, we've just gone up to 1969. I mean, we could go to the end of his career, the interviews he did in the 80s, and see if there's anything to say. But I think basically we've covered his attitude, what he was doing, and he kept that attitude most of the time. He'd do variations of his personality in different contexts through the years, but he was consistent to this stated objective that we read in the late 60s interviews.
Hey, Bob.
Whether he was a Don Quixote or not.
Bob?
I mean, he wanted to... Did somebody say something?
It's Evan. I hear you.
Yeah. It was
Evan. It's Evan.
Hey, I just want to thank you so much for allowing me to powwow with your Zappa crew. I have to turn out and in, and so thank you so much, and I will see you next Saturday or Tuesday or something.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Evan.
All right. Bye, Bert. Hi, everybody.
Take care, Evan.
Bye, Evan.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Yeah, the Don Quixote of Frank. He somehow, like he says, I'm not interested in entertainment, I'm into music. Well, he seems to have an expanded idea of what music is. He's into using environments to create altered perspectives. And it was seen as him doing music, but maybe his idea about what he was doing is the deeper part.
Yeah, no, I liked it.
He would bother people. People wouldn't know what to make of what he's doing. Okay, he's talking about this and that, do that for 18 months, and then suddenly he's doing something completely different.
Right,
and
he's going
maybe
from
contradicting what he said he was going to do.
Yeah, which is a very McLuhan-esque. It's very Dobbsian. It's very ionic.
Yeah, that's right.
And also,
the Black Caucus.
The Black Caucus. Bob is the figurehead. If there are any caucuses here, I guess you're still the figurehead, whatever it is. So if there's the ET caucus, you're going to be the figurehead of that too. So,
yeah.
He's also president of the student council. He's also
that's great.
In the global high school.
The what's that?
In the global high school.
In the global high school, yeah. Oh, we've advanced because we were elementary school age before. Well, I always liked Zappa's statement about that he did something serious that he didn't take seriously or something to that effect. Was that his statement?
Right. Yeah, he said people can't understand how you can seriously do something you don't take serious.
Right. Which is a great sort of ionic phrase in and of itself.
Yeah.
But you...
I think I have it right in this file folder. Might have the exact statement in this file folder here. Did we finish? So David Wally, he's upset that Zappa has stopped playing, and Wally's going to go on and write a book about Zappa. Wally passed away a few years ago. He had a falling out with Frank, which really upset him. I was in the middle of that. I read the manuscript before it was published in New York. That was at the time 200 Motels came out in November 1971. And I was a confidant to Dave Wally while he commiserated about his falling out with Frank. And then I would talk to Frank about it. So I was go-between. I didn't try to ameliorate it. I just heard their different views. Okay, so I'm looking for the LA Free Press interview, so we can read exactly what he said. Just a second.
Around what year?
Oh, this is August 69. I know the exact date of the interview. August 69 in the Los Angeles Free Press, I think it was called. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing it. I've got to July, September. I thought I saw it the other day. There's that.
So you said something that Zappa made a statement. You said it maybe a few minutes ago that he said something about crowds. He didn't like crowds or the masses, something to that effect.
No, the journalist said that, and that's not necessarily true. I mean, Frank enjoyed doing what he was doing. Can't say he didn't like the masses.
Right, he was entertaining them. I'm trying to parse out what he's saying and what's being attributed to him.
I'm looking at. I think I'm getting close to the article.
Dave Wiley had some interesting observations of Frank in that article you just read.
Yes. He was starting to think it through about what he would say. Look at this. And, Roxy went and saw Pauline Oliveros yesterday. So, the Zappa, it's date Los Angeles Free Press. Looking for the date.
Pauline was born in Houston, Texas. Is
that where you are right now?
Yes. Well, I'm in Spring, which is just in a suburb.
Right. I'm looking for the date. Doesn't show the date. What? Well, I have an advertisement from the paper, but I don't know if it's the same day as the interview. The advertisement says June 20th, 69. So here's how the interview starts. Paul Eberle is the journalist. So Zappa goes, "What do you want to talk about?" Paul, "I'd like to confine it strictly to music and just talk about that. I'm not particularly interested in your high school basketball coach and all that crap." Zappa says, "Good." Paul, "I just heard your new album, Uncle Meat, and some of it sounds like some of the new Polish music. And some of it sounds like Zap Comics," that's R. Crumb's Zap Comics, "set to music." Frank says, "I can dig it. I can dig it." Paul says, "And in a lot of it, there's obviously serious intent, despite sounding like Zap Comics or Polish music." And Zappa says, "It's all serious intent. I seriously intended to make that album sound exactly the way it sounds. And some people can't understand that you can seriously want to do something that's not serious." So I always say it's seriously do something. He says that you can seriously want to do something that's not serious. And some people can't understand that you can seriously want to do something that's not serious. So Paul says, they think the two have to be done separately, like Spike Jones made some funny records and others that were just chiffon music. Zappa says, what we do and have from the very beginning is concept art, Like the real artistic merit of what we do does not necessarily exist on the disc itself. It's like different tones. I tried to explain this concept in a lecture I gave to a group of radio broadcasters. Do you know Pauline Oliveira's piece on the Argosy label? She's made a piece of music on which the sounds are generated this way. Two sounds, one below the audible range of hearing and one above the audible range of hearing. And from them are produced, quote, difference tones. Paul says, are they audible? Zappa says, yeah, they're quite audible, but they happen in between the two real things. So if you vary those two tones slightly, all this mass in between shifts. And so if you create a piece where the tones are very slightly, what?
I'm just laughing at that. I like that statement. I like that statement.
So if
it's
you vary
above and below.
This one?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So if you vary those two tones slightly, all this mass in between shifts. Is that the sentence?
Yeah, you're playing outside of the range of human hearing, but if you distort those tones, then it becomes what was the last sentence? The last.
Two sounds, one below the audible range of hearing and one above. Oh, here's Roxy. How you doing, Roxy?
Hey,
go ahead.
Yes, Colonel Bert was interested in how technology has expanded our perception to hear with or be aware of much more frequencies that we will be able to hear without these aids. So that's one of the things she was always interested in experimenting with, how to expand our hearing capabilities, and that's how she developed this idea of quantum hearing.
Oh.
Because with technology we can be aware of many aspects of sound that maybe without the visualization, for example, of waveforms and other sound parameters, we will not be able to distinguish or to somehow modify them.
So what Zappa's saying here in 1969, 46 years later, 47 years later, she's still working on this idea.
Yes,
right?
How the human perception and cognitive abilities have been expanded by technology. And
well, that's ionic, and that's what McLuhan says. So she's not against technology.
Oh. No, I think she explores all types of sound, acoustic and synthetic.
Now, did she say any of this when you saw her yesterday, or she just got you into the meditation and talked about how to do that?
No. No, I read before of this. She had quantum hearing. But through music, one of her interests is how somehow sound connects you to what she thinks is spiritual.
Yeah, she's reaching for, but that's not fossil.
Yes, because she thinks creation and music making is a way to connect with this thing people outside the ionic ideas called spirit. Like some type of connection with the thingness. And she has been interested in many aspects of sound, how sound creates community, how sound heals, and how we perceive, for example, a space with sound, for example, the Doppler effect or stereo, or how we locate sounds. Help us understand our environment. It's part of not only the acoustic space, but also the visual space in her view.
So that statement about her taking sounds above and below the human range of hearing and then distorting them and the effects that are created by that, there's something like there's something in the, like a pattern that could be there, like something in the gap, or there's something interesting. There's something interesting about that notion, but it seems like it could be a pattern that's applied to something here.
Yes, because another thing she was is how, for example, whales or communicate in big distances, and for example, well, or this galaxy of water through sounds, like the bats, they emit this wonderful sound, and they feel reflections of food, some types of fishes or things that are in the water. That, I mean, this singing is not only aesthetic, but has other functions in how they interact with the environment. She somehow thought a bit.
Roxy, your phone's sort of breaking up there.
You know,
Hey, Roxy, let me call you. I'll bring you on the line so it'll be clearer. Okay? So you can get off the computer or whatever you're on, and I'll just flash you in, okay? Okay? Oh, yes, she went off. Okay. I'll be back in a minute, guys.
Okay.
All right. Hey,
Entertain them, Bart
Yes.
or Bert.
We'll entertain each other.
Bart, did you get to hear? Did you get to hear it? Yeah. Did you hear Brian's engagement with Ion last week with the planet and the sun?
Oh yeah, I heard all of it. Yep. Yeah. So Brian went through that whole struggle about. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, it's just interesting what Ion told him about, because he admitted that we can look at it, our existence as it's a flat plane with a sphere over us like a dome, but then the sun is not within or without. And that made me think that all the space pictures you ever see, it's always dark. You never see the sun when they have pictures from outer space. Have you ever noticed that? Or have you ever seen the sun, like from the space station or any type of... They never show the sun when they're in outer space. And when Ion said that, that made me think of that last week when he was speaking with Brian.
I didn't... They've got the NASA telescopes pointed at it, but I guess maybe if you're outside of the atmosphere that... you might be in danger of wrecking your equipment if you're shooting it straight at the sun. Who knows? Because they've got I'm sure they have...
Well, but you don't see the light. You don't really see the light. I mean, if you look at how the sun illuminates our planet, when they have outer space, I mean, flying by, you don't really see the beam of light like what we see. And that just made me think of what Ion told Brian. But it also made me think that Ion told me there were 8 suns.
Yes, but good luck finding those. But I like it. Ian did say that once.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. They're back.
Yeah, Roxy's back, and she was saying she thought we were on the air. She was saying something about singing. Roxy, knowing what you are going to say.
The singing of the whales that.
Yeah.
They just don't sing like us for fun or for aesthetic reasons, but to relate to their environment. And they communicate not only between them, but with the waves and the vibration with other things through the water. So I like that idea. And Paulina Oliveros has also studied the brain and hearing. And we know that we use only a part of our brain, very small part of our brain, and she wonders how technology is going to help us expand evolve in a way that we could use all our cognitive and perceptual capabilities, all of our brain.
Yeah.
Because there are many techniques, like the overtone technique, that are used by the Siberian and other types of techniques of the use of voice or singing, or this thing they do in the mountains.
Like the Tibetans,
It is like la 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 la. No.
Oh, yodeling.
Oh, like in the Tyrol. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Yep.
I mean, if we all could sing, there is a lot of things we can do with our body as an instrument. And she thinks it's something we have to develop to be somehow fully evolved. And I think that has to do with what Ian is saying.
Did you say to be free of love or full of love? I misheard that?
Fully evolved.
Fully evolved. Okay. Actually, Bob made a good point. It is, the response to her query is really fa sol la, because that's working on the ascended level. Whatever.
Yes, and she has also looked into cymatics and how sound, for example, can interact with particles such as electrons, and of course there is a quantum hearing. There are vibration and frequencies affecting the molecules, the particles, the cells, and we're becoming more aware of those things also with the help of technology.
But I wonder. I think Ion is
see those things or measure.
Has addressed like the solfeggio frequencies. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
I didn't hear.
You are.
Okay, solfeggio frequencies are...
Frequencies, sorry?
It's solfeggio, SOLFEGGIO. And it says, the description here is, the solfeggio frequencies make up the ancient six-tone scale thought to have been used in sacred music, including the beautiful and well-known Gregorian chants. The chants and their special tones were believed to impart spiritual blessings when sung in harmony. Each solfeggio tone is comprised of a frequency required to balance your energy and keep your body, mind, and spirit in perfect harmony. But I think that Ion's sort of discounted these binaural beats, or sort of using, at least up to this point, technology in that way to alter maybe your physiology, or you can help me, Bob or Bert, if you recall that.
Talk about chips or like implants that will make you, for example, have perfect pitch or play an instrument or something like that. They think someday we will be able to download this type of things, and like a program, information.
Well,
and then like an app.
I don't. That's a good question. I would say anything that's possible in.
Isn't that what the drops do? Didn't Ion say that fossil law was in the RNA drops?
Well, I think.
I thought I heard that.
I think there are going to be these both things being developed, both the cyborgs and the ionic technologies perfecting. I mean, if we can use our brain as it is supposed to be fully on with the hypothalamus on, that there is a lot of art which has the form of a brain, and the part of the hypothalamus is light or is the eye of the providence, and it's really showing that there is this awareness about the brain and this turning the hypothalamus on that is going to change our perception. It's going to enhance, like, I think we're going to be able to hear with the whole skin, for example.
Is that something you heard Ian say?
Like,
because it sounds like you mean the cells are picking up frequencies or tones, and
yes,
but you're saying
he's saying a lot about the magnetism and the frequencies, and that's how cells communicate with electric impulses, magnetism, and chemistry. And this, I suppose there have been some frequencies that are going to be somehow amplified so that we can really tune into them. And this is going to morph the perfect self. I think that's one of the things that is happening besides the chemistry, because Ion is talking so much about the frequency. But maybe I should ask him.
Yeah,
yes, I really like the concept of Pauline Oliveira about this quantum hearing at the cellular level, because for me it sounds very ionic.
Yeah, and I was trying to get a pattern from her pulling from above and below the human range of hearing, and then like rubbing those things together and having effects come from that. It's almost like the non-physical of Ion rubbing with our own non-physical and creating overtones or tones from that.
It's a good pattern.
But on one level...
Because it's amazing. We don't even really know what the energy is, what matter is, really. There are no real definitions of many things. It's all very blurry.
Well,
Ion says we don't even know how these things work, but
they work.
It's a fact that we have the impression things are solid, but all is fata morgana, all is illusion.
Yeah, Bert had just mentioned the whole struggle that Brian went through I think it was the last call with Ion about the Earth being flat. And he was getting fired up about the Earth being flat and asking if there was even a ball at all or what it was we were on. And I think after several minutes of him going back and forth with Ion in this sort of struggle, he sort of loses it. Says, "Well, now I don't know where the hell I am." He's even more lost than he started. And then Bob sort of interjected that you have to let go of your visual bias. You have to stop worried about the visual, and move into your tactile, into the interval. So it's basically it all falls back. It all falls back to what you see is not real and what you can't see is real.
Yes, but Ian was saying that too.
Yeah.
I think last to Payday when he was saying we have telescopes, and all of a sudden there is no Pluto and there is a new planet. Explain me that. So this is the type of things that he says shouldn't be but are. And
right, the ninth planet.
I suppose all these things maybe where or are. Like the Earth is flat, and all these models have been somehow created, and
now the veil is
and maybe, like Ian said, as we read the story, we are changing the vanishing point, but maybe things were really different before. Like when he says there was no America, America came out from something, appeared, a new world. That's the type of thing that might seem illogical, but that's the way I suppose it really is.
Ion defined a planet as a celestial body held to influence the fate of human beings, and then says you can loop into or without of it, meaning a planet, but without gravity, which is fixing to change, you're not going to recognize the planets anyway. So that's when they said that Brian was very apropos to question the validity of all these things, the time-space fields and so on. So our perceptions are going to change.
Yeah.
Well, obviously.
Yes, and
that's
today
tied in. I saw that's
that it's about connecting frequencies. So the connecting of the worlds of the different. It has to do with this connection of frequencies.
I think there was there's also, is it a connection or is it like an acclamation? Because Ion's made statements to the effect that there are new frequencies coming into the planet or over the planet or however you want to say that, and that we're taking the completement formulas and sort of and engaging Iondom as a way to become acclimated to those frequencies that are sort of flooding or like the two universes smashing together.
Yes, because it's the thing with the castles and many constructions and streets.
Right,
and
that's what I was going to say.
It's all interconnected. And with Google, you can connect like Chambord with Egypt and with this and that and that. And so it's this weird net of things that are connected. And for example, the cathedrals were really made to amplify, to resonate. And I suppose all these ascended people were trying to reconnect with the non-physical through these constructions, with these frequencies, and maybe they thought the wine was what the RNA drops are, because they are all into wine, and because of the Bible. That's the blood.
Yeah, that's trying to connect. It's just going through the it's remembrance. It's remembering, but it's you're not able to really connect until you get here.
That was the porn.
It was the porn, yeah.
That was the
You'll be drunk on it.
Of all the mass and the transmutation and all this is the form of the RNA drops of the completion.
It's the ascension, the connection,
the real transmutation of the blood. Yes, and for example, for me it was a big epiphany to see that if you see the Nile Delta, it's like a brain, and the Nile is like the spine.
What was the first? What was the first?
What I was saying about the fractals.
Nile Delta.
Yeah, the Nile.
The Nile Delta, Bart.
Yeah.
The Nile Delta.
The Nile. Egypt, the river.